Welcome, everyone. Thank you. It's all for Brian. Thank you. I hope everyone has enjoyed their time here at CA. It's really about learning all the different customer journeys, and I hope you've taken away a lot of information. Brian from Ecolab is here to give us a journey of his infrastructure and application availability. So, with that in line, let's get started. I am Kimberly Bajon. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for CA Spectrum and for CA Service Operations Insight. Brian, let's get started with a little bit of an introduction to yourself.
Sure, thank you, and first thank you everyone for being here. I know it's late in the day on day 2. Everyone's looking forward to the party tonight. Actually, when I first saw what time we were presenting, I mentioned to CA, you could almost say we're the opening act to the party. So I tried to get some drinks and appetizers, but that got denied.
Just didn't work out.
Yeah. So my name is Brian Cooney. I work with Ecolab. I've been there about 8 years, although I've been working in the field of monitoring for about 18 years. The bulk of that's been on the technical side. I've worked with just about every type of monitoring you can think of. And it wasn't until just this year that I switched over to the management side. I think I still have that new manager smell on me a little bit. So.
It smells good, and you wear it well. So, Ecolab is a great product line that is not so much in our day-to-day life, right? They're doing a lot of things that keeps us safe on a regular basis, but we as consumers don't actually know the logo very well. And if you could take a look, keep an eye out for that, because now when you go around and maybe in your doctor's offices or when you go to ballparks, keep an eye out. You'll actually start to see that logo at places.
Yeah, so Ecolab, kind of like you said, we're one of those big companies that a lot of people don't really know about. We're doing a lot of our work in the background. We're probably most famous for foaming hand soap. If you go to the restrooms, that soap is probably ours. But we're headquartered in St. Paul. We are Fortune 500, low 200s. And aside from the soap, we're the global leader in water, hygiene, and energy technologies, as well as services to those same industries.
Excellent.
As far as the size of the company goes, we have 47,000 employees, including 25,000 in the field. We're serving over 1 million customer locations in over 170 countries around the globe.
So that gives you a nice insight of what Ecolab does bring to our day-to-day life. As you can see, we're handling of food, the kitchen systems, and our clean water and energy. So now let's take a look at your infrastructure.
Sure. Great question. We just happen to have a slide here to help us with it. So as far as servers go, we have about 4,000 servers, the bulk of which are Windows. I'd say 90% Windows, 10% Unix. We have about 2,100 monitored network devices. Our primary data centers are in Eagan, Minnesota, which is outside of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and in Naperville, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. We also have global data centers around the globe, obviously. So. Applications, like most companies, we have our internal and external customer-facing ones. A couple unique ones I'm going to mention. We have a lot of tablet, iPad applications. So an example of this would be those field associates I mentioned. They're out there, they might be helping a restaurant with inspection, a city or state inspection. They're entering the data on their iPad or their tablet, and then they'll sync it up at night, and the customer can access that data through a portal. A lot of times it's very time sensitive. They may have to get that in within, to the city within the day or within hours, follow-up stuff. So it's very critical that those sync times are there. Another example is what I call phone home apps. These are these little black boxes that live at customer locations, and they're reporting data back to our data centers through little cellular devices. So an example of this is our pool and spa division has this little thing. It goes into water and it's measuring the water chemistry and making sure it's safe. It's reporting the data back all the time to our applications in a data center. But if the water ever gets out of balance, so it's unhealthy or even dangerous to get into, we need to make sure we let someone at the hotel know. So if anyone brought their swimsuit, hopefully we're protected here with our Ecolab device.
The water's fine.
But I mentioned those just because we're also a huge SAP shop. So I mentioned those applications because each of them have unique characteristics that make it sometimes a challenge from a monitoring perspective.
Certainly. Now, Ecolab had a big merger with Nalco about 2013.
2013,
you said, right?
Yep.
So how did that really affect how you monitored for your infrastructure?
Yeah, so in 2013, Ecolab acquired Nalco, and it was treated as a merger. So like any company that goes through a merger, there's all kinds of critical decisions. We have different technologies, sometimes competing against each other, and you have to decide how to move forward with all of it. So monitoring was the same. When we looked at Nelco and Ecolab, we had two different solutions, different softwares. We had to basically come up with a solution here. We're gonna take one solution or the other. Are we gonna try to mesh them together, or are we gonna build from the ground up? When we looked at everything, we realized that each solution had some things we did really well, and each had some gaps that we didn't do so well. So the ultimate solution was to go with, from the ground up, build something new, which, thinking back, it was a ton of work, but it was really pretty cool. It was a fun challenge, because it's not often you get to go back in time and redo your solution and fix everything that maybe you didn't do right the first time around.
And a lot of people have experienced where mergers come in, it's a very pivotal point, but you do get faced with a very basic option to blow it all out and start all over, or piecemeal things together. So great choice, but let's now take a look at, this is what you decided to do, but how did you get started?
Yep. So the very first thing we did, we came up with a vision and mission statement, and I'm not going to read that to you verbatim, but it boiled down to a few things. Deployment had to be fast. We needed to get everything out there quick. Full coverage, we needed some level of monitoring everywhere. So every device we had, we wanted to at least have a minimal level of monitoring. Process and standardization to work with our solution. And end-to-end application monitoring was key. It had to be something that we could easily deploy to our applications, at least our critical ones. And availability reporting against those applications for SLA purposes.
Okay. And you gave us a nice diagram here of what things looked like.
Yeah. 2013, it was a fairly chaotic time. So we had a lot of software. As you can see, we had all kinds of monitoring tools in our environment between the two companies. I think when we counted it up, we had 10 different event consoles at the time. And so our NOC had all these consoles they had to look at. Some of them were integrated with ticketing tools, some weren't. We actually had two different ticketing systems, which didn't help. When we did a review of all of our assets, 60% of them were monitored, only 50% of our critical applications. So like I said, we had a lot of gaps. We had a lot of inconsistencies. Even what we were monitoring, it wasn't, we weren't maybe monitoring disk space on every server. We had just database. If someone came by and said, I want to monitor my table, we might do it, but we weren't doing it across the board. So a lot of gaps there. And what we did is we looked at all the software we had, we looked at a couple other options out there, and it really trying to figure out what tools we could do that would eliminate some of the other ones. And it boiled down to CA for most of it. So we had CA for network, okay, for application monitoring and for event management, and then Microsoft SCOM is our outlier. That's doing our server-based monitoring.
So you were able to wipe out Oracle and HP and SolarWinds and NetIQ. All of them are Nagios. They're just gone for you now.
Yep.
Excellent. Now, so now let's talk about walking through the implementation process of this.
Sure. So we had our software selection done. The next thing we had to do is we wanted to focus on what I call the core building blocks of monitoring, kind of the concept you have to walk before you can run. So the first thing was base monitoring, and that goes back to that some degree of monitoring on everything. So what we did, I'll take Windows for an example. We took our Windows servers and we came up with what we call a base monitoring template, and it's just looking at common metrics across all Windows servers. We could push to every single server, CPU, memory, disk space, is it up or down? And what we did is we automated it, so any new server that comes in our environment, it would by default get that profile.
Okay.
Did that for database, did that for Unix, did that for everything. The next thing was availability monitoring, which is application availability. And again, I said we needed end-to-end monitoring. We needed it to be fast and fairly easy to do. There's a lot of tools out there that will monitor applications for you end-to-end, but they're not all easy. So we came up with the synthetic transactions to do that.
Okay.
And we'll touch on that in a little bit. Reporting was another big one. Management and business, they made it very clear that we wanted to be able to not just alert when the applications were down, but to also go back in time and show how we're performing over a month, over a week, and use that for SLA reporting. And the last thing was process and standardization. Anyone that's done monitoring for any length of time knows if you don't have that, your monitoring solution is going to be dated within months. So, for example, we tied into our change solution when we have applications changing in our environment, or we have servers being added or removed. We're getting notified to keep our monitoring in sync.
Okay, so that's what keeps you in line. Very good. Now this is a great form of having a nice box structure, but life doesn't live in a box, right?
No.
So you always have to think of what comes and what's going to fit outside of the box. So you have a process for that.
We do. So we came up with kind of a tiered system. As you can see here, if you go from left to right, is kind of the more mature our monitoring gets. So that base monitoring is what everything gets. Then we have the bronze tier, and that's most applications are going to get at least that.
Okay.
That would just be things like, are your services running, processes consuming too much CPU, log file monitoring, things like that. Then we have the silver tier, which is our end-to-end. So those are reserved for more critical apps, and that's where the synthetics come into play. And then the gold tier is the APM monitoring, that deep dive analytical stuff. And by doing this, it allowed us, we didn't have unlimited finances, right? Like I'm sure everyone else does, but it let us really take the finances we did have for monitoring and focus on our more critical apps while still maintaining a level of monitoring everywhere else.
Excellent, excellent. Now, as you mentioned, you would touch on synthetic transactions as we got further in, and that's in your silver tier. So let's take a look closer at your...
Yep, so synthetic monitors, I don't know if everyone knows what they are or not, so I'll just touch on that.
Please touch.
I often refer to them as robots, but think of them as we're trying to replicate common end-user transactions and create a monitor out of it. So a lot of, like a user might open a browser, browse to their website, log in, do something, and log out. We record that, and then you can replay it back like a script every 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever makes sense. A couple great things come out of that. You can, one synthetic monitor can monitor multiple components of your application. So, that login test, just one test, you're checking your web services up, authentication, security, if you're accessing a report, it's checking database. So you get a lot of value out of one monitor. It's also exercising the application 24/7. So you can get a baseline all hours of the day, and if an application isn't being used in the middle of the night, you're going to be able to detect any issues with it. And once you figure out how to do them, they're fairly easy to spin up. So you get a lot for your money monitoring your applications that way. One requirement we did have was we wanted to have redundancy with our monitoring. So synthetics allowed us to do that. And by redundancy, I mean we have multiple data centers, and we wanted to be able to test from all those data centers. So I can create one login test, and let's say we tested from Egan data center and Naperville, and if one of those is failing and the other one's working, it tells you something different than if both of them are failing, right?
Okay,
so,
yes.
We could use that. We could model that into SOI, and I think we're ahead of slide here, but
yeah, it shifts somehow, I think. Yeah.
Oh, well. That allowed us to get that redundancy in there, and when we declare application down, we only do that when both data centers are failing, the robots in both of them, and that was really valuable for our reporting, which we'll touch on in a minute here.
Yeah. So for this one, actually, I guess it's a little thrown off, right?
Yeah.
It gives a different slide. But now this is kind of where you are today about, first you had 9 monitoring consoles, which reminded actually of a cartoon I had seen. There was a NOC engineer, and they had a conveyor belt going by because there were so many different tools and solutions. They just let each laptop screen go by so he could keep up.
Spin.
Just keep on going, yeah. So now we're down from here working on this one. You have one.
Yeah, so our solution today, kind of what we mentioned earlier, we have our NOC, it's got one event console, it's SOI. It's got a bidirectional integration with ServiceNow for ticketing. If we click
I'm sorry, to the next one.
So our server-based monitoring is SCOM, like we said. What's that? I'm not going to brag up here. But it was me, yeah. Server-based monitoring, we have SCOM, but we're starting to use UIM as well for some of the gaps that we have with SCOM.
Okay.
And
then for the application?
Application, it's a full CA suite. We're using APM synthetics, both externally and internally. Externally with ASM, and internally with E2E Atmon probe, which is a UIM probe.
Okay.
We have APM Interscope. We have CA80A for a network perspective view of the application. And if we switch to the next one.
The network.
For network, again, it's the full CA suite, Spectrum, ADA, PC. So.
Very good. So now you've got all this covered, but you need to have reporting. So let's take a look at your reporting.
Well, let's not.
Our slides
let's
are
not
going
look at
the other way.
reporting. Let's scramble.
Somebody shifted our slides, but we're going to go right along with the party.
So what we're going to talk about now is a comparison of where we were and where we are.
Yes.
So 2013 versus 2016. As we said before, we had, it was chaotic 2013. We went literally from 10 event consoles down to 1.
Right.
We have 1 ticketing integration, ServiceNow. We went from having 60% of our environment monitored to, I think it says 95. I'd say it's closer to 98 to 100% of our environment monitored, at least with some degree. We've doubled the number of applications we're monitoring. We went from 50% of our critical apps monitored to 100%. And we're monitoring internally and off-network externally. So done a ton there. We've closed a ton of the gaps. All the gaps we had in 2013, we've closed. The only gaps we have now are new technologies like cloud. I would call it a gap, but
moving to the next stage. Yeah.
So we're pretty proud of where we were and came from and where we are today.
I think our next missing slide has reappeared. So here's when you were talking on the synthetic monitoring.
So I won't go through this whole thing here, but so the icons on the right here, the top one, so this is an SOI service model. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. We're using it to model the health of our applications. So that top one there, the one that's all green, the very top icon is the application itself. And the two that come down from it are the alerts or the monitors. So say one's data center X and one's data center Y. And that top one, everything's green. Both monitors are green, so the application is showing healthy or green. The middle one is that example where one data center is failing and one's not. So we switched the health to degraded, but it's not down for sure because people can still use it in one of our data centers. And the last one is where everything's failing and the application's reported down.
Okay.
And again, that was a key component for us to be able to report because our businesses are relying on this data to tell them how healthy their apps are. And if we say it's down, we really wanted to make sure it was down. So that was a key component.
That would mean don't go swimming in the pool.
Yeah, don't swim in that bottom
pool. The first
pool.
one goes swimming in the pool, the bottom one don't. But now I think we get to talk on reporting. Now that's where that shifted back around.
No?
So
oh yeah, we do. Okay.
Yeah, reporting now.
Good. All right. So reporting. As I mentioned, it was very clear to us by management and business owners that they wanted to be able to report on this data, not just knowing their apps are down. Ideally, we wanted to use SOIs out-of-the-box reporting. The problem was we had a couple requirements that prevented us from doing that, and the main one was this concept of scrubbing known outages. So if someone had a change ticket to do an outage on Sunday and took the app down, in our monitors, we didn't create a maintenance window for whatever reason, they didn't tell us about it, we detect it's down. We didn't want to count them as downtime, count that app as down during that known window.
Okay.
So we needed to go back and kind of delete those outages. And we couldn't do that with the SOI out-of-the-box solutions. What we ended up doing is we created our own custom reporting. It's based on those synthetics. It's all based on the synthetic data that's coming in 24/7. Okay. We have the models, the services in SOI that are modeling the health. And then we're taking crystal reports and we're basically going against the SOI database to pull out those health statistics and create our SLAs. Then what we do with those SLAs is we meet once a week with management and business and we look at all of our critical apps and any of them that aren't green get a little extra light shining on them. So you don't want to be in the non-green at those meetings.
Because the microscope comes on you. Yes. Okay. So you've done a great job. You've set the basis of your restructuring, your objective to how you're going to restructure, your base monitoring, your synthetic monitoring, now your reporting as well, to make you now more of a proactive measurement instead of reactive. But that takes a new vision. So would you like to share with us kind of your viewpoint on proactive monitoring?
Yeah, so when I think of monitoring an application, or even an application alone, I think of like a big circle, that's your application, and then inside that circle you have different subcomponents. So you might, hold on, don't get too crazy with the arrows.
Oh, I didn't get too crazy.
Here.
I'm not getting crazy with the arrows yet.
You have subcomponents in there, so you might have your storage here, your database here, your web services, all in there. And the key to your monitoring is to, when you start experiencing issues with the application, you want to isolate the root cause, right? So the more mature your monitoring is, the better you are at isolating that.
Sure.
So that's kind of what these arrows were. So if all you had was server-based monitoring, you might know a server's down or it ran out of disk space or whatever, but you don't know which applications are impacted. It's a bit of work, a lot of work to figure out what's going on in that scenario. Then you have your synthetics, which would be the next arrow, which gets you a little bit closer. Now you kind of know that, in that example again, your web page came up okay, your login worked, but you clicked on this report and it failed. You know there's an issue with reporting, but there's still work to figure out why the reporting is.
Yes.
And then the bullseye arrow is that APM. You might get down to literally the line of code that's causing an issue. So that's ultimately the goal here, right?
Okay.
And so a use case where this all comes into play, we have a application, Water and Process Services, or WPS as we call them. They had their app that every time you get to, I shouldn't say every time, but frequently when you accessed a certain aspect of their page,
okay, it
would just hang, clock, whatever. And at first our synthetics were picking it up quite a bit. We'd say, hey, you have out of bounds, this is slower than normal.
Okay.
And we could actually go to SCOM then and see that CPU was pegged on the database server, but that's as far as we got. And the application owners couldn't figure out what the issue was. So, and at the time, it was just that monitors were alerting. It was these little brief outages. No users were calling in. So what we did is we band-aided it. We figured out if we stopped and started these services, it would go away until it happened again.
Okay.
Well, eventually, as time went by, users started calling in. It got slower and slower, right? And we knew that just this Band-Aid solution wasn't good enough. We had to roll our sleeves up and figure out what the root cause was. And that's where we threw an APM, through APM agents on that .NET server. And literally the next time it happened, we went back and we looked at the traces, and within less than an hour, we narrowed it down to a SQL query that was taking a minute, 2 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes to complete. We handed that off to the SQL team. We had the root cause identified, and took them a little bit of time to tune it, but within a couple days we had the whole thing fixed. So it's really cool how that all comes into play, and you can see it all working.
And everyone, I'm sure, would love to hear that a malformed SQL query never causes problems for anybody. No, it never happens. So what is next up for Ecolab?
I don't think we're talking about that yet.
So
we're just going to roll with this here.
Yeah, the slides are out of
This
order.
year, it happens to be our, if these are in the right order, it would make more sense, right?
Yeah.
But we're trying to talk about how as our monitoring got more mature, how it helped us as a company. Mm-hmm. And this here shows our critical incidents per month. This is out of service now. Unfortunately, I could only go back a year, so it's just showing really the good stuff here. But if we could go back 3 years, you would see a parabola, and as we added more and more monitoring, we detected more and more issues, and we had more and more criticals every month. And then it kind of plateaued, and then we started resolving those issues, and that's kind of where this comes in. You start seeing it come down, and now we're at roughly 10 per month, which we'd like to get down to 0, but now I'd like to take full credit and say this is all due to monitoring. Although, to be honest, I'm sure there's some other stuff in play there.
Factors,
but
yeah.
There's definitely a correlation there with how our monitoring got more mature, and we've reduced the number of critical incidents.
Well, and more so is you're proactive. So now you're being able to get in front of them before they become a critical issue too, right? That's a big factor of the whole thing as well. But that's a 70% decrease in incidents in 1 year's time frame. Very impressive.
Yes.
Absolutely impressive.
I'll take full credit.
Yeah, you should.
Our team.
All right, over here. A couple of these guys get some credit. And it is true success comes when you go to a proactive monitoring. So when you had the synthetics and the deep dive analytics, all of that comes in line to get you to a point of having something like this.
Yep.
So now I would go into what's next, because I can see pay attention to the top slide and not the order of the slides. Here we go.
Yeah.
So this is what's up next for you.
Yeah, so what's next for us? So, as we go back to that bullseye one, we showed how we detected issues, but we didn't pinpoint the issue. So that's really our focus now, is getting better at pinpointing the root cause of any issues in our environment. And we're going to try to do that by pushing out APM to more applications.
Okay.
By getting CA, ADA, more of our applications modeled in ADA, so we can, from a network perspective, see how the traffic is going through an application.
The flow through.
Those two things will help us quite a bit. Also, as I mentioned, cloud monitoring is a big thing for us. Like I'm sure most of us out here, more and more of our apps are going to cloud, so we're trying to stay ahead of that curve and figure out how to monitor those apps.
Okay, and I think you mentioned UIM for some of the gaps that you're finding in SCOM as well a little bit too. Yeah. So he's on there twice.
Yeah, so we have UIM that we're filling in some of our gaps, like we're using it for storage right now. and we're looking at using it for Citrix, which we weren't able to monitor with SCOM,
Okay.
at least to our satisfaction. So.
Well, maybe you can do that with UIM, certainly.
Yep.
Very good. All right, well, thank you, everyone. We're going to be closing out the session. There is one great more session here. Ruud is here to present soon, so it's a great story with KPN, also using with Service Operations Insight. Did you have a question?
So you talked about the synthetic monitoring.
Yep.
What product are you using? What tool are you using?
Okay, so the question was, what
Which
product
tool are
are
you
we
using
using
for
for synthetics? Yeah. So for our internal monitoring synthetics, we're using UIM E2E Atmon probe and URL response time. So URL response is kind of a simple version of it. It will just tell you is your website up or down. E2E Atmon probe will let you script that whole transaction of the login and everything else. And externally, we're using, used to be APM Cloud, now it's Application Synthetic Monitoring.
Yeah, it's application synthetic
ASM.
monitoring, yeah.
And that's using JMeter and creating scripts, the similar scripts that you have running internally, you're just doing it externally through ASM.
So do you need UIM 8.4 is fine, or do you?
Yeah, we started with 8.4. I'm looking at Justin. We just upgraded to 8.4.7, but I think we were at 8.4.2 is what we started at. Or 8.2. Some form of those numbers.
Version currency, always
Yeah.
critical. Version currency. You can always, they may have had it there, but you know we're always improving, so yeah.
But yeah, if you want to talk, I love talking that stuff, so.
Exactly. So I would like to thank everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yep,
You did
thank
a
you.
great job. And